I was raised under the Indian ideals, such as like not being allowed to have a boyfriend, not being allowed to stay out late at night, being expected to bring home nothing short of straight A's, or else being told that I'll amount to nothing and I'll be in poverty all my life.
The concept of model minority myth. Can you tell me a little bit about your thoughts on that?
So I would say that the way that I was raised under the Indian ideals, such as like not being allowed to have a boyfriend, not being allowed to stay out late at night, being expected to bring home nothing short of straight A's, or else being told that I'll amount to nothing and I'll be in poverty all my life, and being taught that STEM is what I should be aiming for and this and that as a career to be in. No talking back to elders, no matter what, that type of thing. That's what was modeled for me in childhood, much of it which I would openly reject. And model minority myth, I would say, is when I go back to how I said I was expected to bring home straight A's. So both my parents have engineering degrees. One has a master's, the other has a PhD. And I was taught that in order to get sponsored immigration-wise to come down to the United States, a lot of Indian people or South Asian people do choose to do master's degrees in the United States because it's more economical in that sense. And in order to do that, in order to be employed and worthy of sponsorship, you have to show that you're a smart, hard worker with stellar grades. And then that mindset keeps on getting passed down intergenerationally, despite the fact that you might have had kids here that are already citizens and don't have to go through the same hurdles that you went through.
Right.
So then if you watch the television, or even in real life, if you keep seeing South Asian people that are doctors, lawyers, engineers, I was taught that things like engineering are fields in which they're considered practical and therefore easier to be able to gain sponsorship to come down here for immigration for, and that mindset keeps kind of getting transferred. And then doctors are super heavily respected in South Asian countries.
Yeah, I guess when there's the Asian thing attached, I think that's like a expectation. You grew up with autism, is that right?
Yes.
And how did that affect your life growing up?
So I wasn't properly diagnosed until the age of 25. And throughout that entire time, I felt as though something was off in a way that I couldn't quite put my finger on, never had an explanation or framework to understand myself or to advocate for myself, to help others understand me. Academically, it affected me because year after year after year growing up, I would get in trouble for things like missing instructions, not following directions, not handing in homework on time. And teachers would chalk it up to not trying hard enough, and so would my family. And my brother, however, was diagnosed before the age of 2. He is going to live with my parents for the rest of his life, and he has the language skills of maybe a toddler, which I think is why he got diagnosed hard and fast.
So his situation, he has autism also?
Yes.
And his situation, it sounds like
he can't speak much.
Okay, so so you guys were on the extremes of autism spectrum?
Or now the term is, are your support needs low, medium, or high? So he's a person that would have high support needs.
And he was diagnosed at 2. And why was it that you were not diagnosed until you were 25?
I was a hyperverbal communicator. I had early speech language acquisition. After the age of 1.5, my parents would notice things like if they asked me to say hello to someone, I would hide my face. And if they tried to push me, I would burst into tears, for example. I think they just thought it was social anxiety. Mm-hmm. And then the things I talked about in school, that was chalked up to not trying hard enough. Socially, I would notice, my family would notice, my parents would set up play dates with other kids. They would come over and then they would never come over again. Mm-hmm. That would continue. And then they would notice that if someone said hi to me, I wouldn't say it back. This would continue until and then my brother was going through speech therapy for years. When I was maybe a 3rd or 4th grader, the person who ran the clinic apparently said something to them like, I've noticed your daughter doesn't look at me. When I ask her a question, she doesn't answer it. She must have a very severe social anxiety. And that was kind of all that came of it.
So when you talked about having social interaction difficulty, I mean, how did you handle that? I mean, with friends, because growing up, friends and things like that are quite important.
So as a kid, in elementary, middle, and high school, I didn't have a lot of close friends at all. As a middle and high schooler, I had friends like within the school system, like a group that I would hang out with in school, but I was still excluded a lot when it came to outings outside of school and fun things kids would do, like birthday parties and go and getting together and drinking and whatever. And I also experienced some teasing and bullying that would start going down every year as kids would mature.
You mentioned bullying earlier, and I wanted to touch a little bit about this because it's so prevalent in just, I guess, not even just in the States. I think everywhere there's some type of bullying. How did you handle that when you're being bullied?
I think that being shy, I was terrified to stand up for myself and would rely on others to do so or not do it at all. And that's something that has carried on to this day and something that is being addressed in therapy. And two, I will say that one thing that has helped me to come to terms with that is, so I have a friend with an autistic child, and she said that her occupational therapist that taught her that children bully because they want you to conform. They can sense something's different about you. And I think that that helped me understand where people are coming from. And then it taught me too, things like someone else once told me, the pediatrician might see a child like me, and my pediatrician would, when my mother would say, I'm worried about how she doesn't have any friends, would simply say, oh, some kids like to be alone. And which that's valid, but it was more than that for me. And I feel like they might say a lot of pediatricians, they'll look at a baby. Are they looking at me when I speak to them? Do they respond to having their name called? Do they talk as much as other kids? They're good type thing. But the bullies in school will pick up the subtle differences in a heartbeat and exploit you for it.
Seems like just a real magnet. I know one of my friends that had interviewed before, she had immigrated from Taiwan to Canada, and she went through this bullying type of thing, and it was really, her father had her stand up for herself, because that when somebody stands up for themselves or is able to do that, the bullies kind of back off, takes away their power, I guess. So for you, it wasn't something that you were able to do because you didn't even necessarily have backup from your parents, So when you're just talking about this, I felt that there was some emotional things that still come up when you talk about that. I don't know if I heard it incorrectly, but the situations that you had growing up, does it still affect you now, even though you're a successful professional woman?
I don't dwell on those things regularly because it's been so long, but I'm learning with my current therapist about how trauma lives in the nervous system and how the part of your brain associated with the emotional side of your brain stores these experiences, and how things like, having experienced a lot of bullying as a kid, if you turn out to be a passive kid, you'll turn into a passive adult type thing. So basically, I had my first therapy at 20 years old as a college student with a graduate clinician. They diagnosed and treated me with social anxiety using exposure therapy tactics, and those worked. But I think that they were a Band-Aid solution in the grand scheme of things. They gave me scripts on how to approach people and talk to people and had me practice them in the real world too, which helped me immensely.
So really just basically learn different scenarios, learn lines that you would just, say when such a certain situation comes up.
I like that even if she didn't properly diagnose me, she had a willingness to work with the fact that I like scripts. And I think that until I got properly diagnosed, I was under the impression that every person in the world plans what they're going to say ahead of time and analyzes social situations afterward. While I made a lot of progress, my anxiety score itself reduced when I went into the real world and graduated. I still sense that something was off in a way that I couldn't quite put my finger on. And what I meant is I could form friendships, but never close ones. Dating felt like a field impossible to navigate. When I would go through jobs, I would go through easy boredom. My issues with missing instructions would keep on coming up and about, and it would affect my performance. I was job hopping. I was making the same salary for 5 years straight. And then I went back to therapy. So I stopped the first therapy at 22, went back at 25, this time to a licensed professional. And within a few months, she was like, I like to look for patterns of behavior in my clients. The pattern I'm picking up with you is it seems you don't know how to read people and people don't know how to read you. And then she was like, I'm an expert, but even I can't read you sometimes. And then she was like, when you first came in here, you had this monotone voice, blank facial expressions, you smile, but not a lot. And at the end of sessions, you don't give me much feedback, even when prompted. And then she was like, and then you say that you've had discussions about you being shy, but I think it's a little more than that because you say autism runs in your family too, and I think you should be tested.
This whole time that you're growing up, you said your parents just thought you were socially awkward. They didn't really think you were out of the norm of other kids. When you were actually diagnosed, I know you're in college and stuff already and an adult, what was their thinking about that? Did they ever say to you that they regretted not being able to help you in that way, or was there any kind of
No.
feedback about that? No.
So I think that I think that I've noticed that if I come up with them with a list of bullet points of what I struggle with, they would agree. If I put a label on it, they would become defensive. And I've come to notice that, I think that a lot of people feel intimidated by the labels, but I feel like that might be a little bit more true in the older generations. And I don't know if maybe it's because I don't know if it's denial and not wanting to admit they have 2 kids on the spectrum due to stigma, or having a mindset of if you identify with the label, you're confining yourself to that and can't self-improve.
In Asian culture, there's quite a lot about face and stuff. So yeah, what you just mentioned about being out there, it would be losing face somehow in the public, and especially because you said your parents are quite successful in their career, chosen careers. So did you ever feel that you blame them in certain ways?
I feel that at the very least, they should have taken me into a child psychologist at some point in life. But again, there's a lot of things that play into a role about why I wasn't taken in. I was a shy, quiet kid. I didn't disrupt the class. I was a female, and so on and so forth. So back then, being that I'm a 90s baby, there was a lack of education, and things like gender and racial bias do play that type of a role.
So in terms of your own mental health and where you are at right now, do you feel that you, on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you feel that you are?
I think that my norm or my homeostasis is that I'm a privileged person who's successful and employed and educated, who doesn't have a high degree of problems. However, I'm in EMDR therapy for a reason, and that's to address the wounds from the past and how they impact my future, such as things such as bullying or being made to feel that I wasn't good enough. After several months in it, I am experiencing a high degree of progress.
If you believe real people and real stories matter, please remember to like and subscribe. It helps us to continue sharing those voices that deserve to be heard.